Hello, I'm Dr. James Bogash, publisher of Modern Health Myths, and today we're going to talk about not exactly a new topic, but one that becomes incredibly important, especially looking at today's environment with viral infections and COVID-19 in particular. And this has to do with obesity and vitamin D status. The idea that people who are obese have generally lower vitamin D levels is not anything new. But unfortunately, this is not a topic that is generally broached or talked about between primary care doctors and their patients who are obese. But it is a very solid fact, something we've seen in pretty much every study that has looked at the question. And these numbers always look at, when we talk about vitamin D, we look at there's normal and there's insufficient. So there's deficient and insufficient. We have normal, and normal is actually a little lower than I'd like to see it. Generally, we consider normal as 20. Um, Deficient would be 20 or below, and um, I personally like to see those numbers upwards around 60. So quite a bit different from what the labs generally consider consider sufficient or insufficient. I like to see those numbers much higher, mainly because vitamin D is very inexpensive and it is a very high safety margin. You really don't get into toxic levels until you hit around 200, and that's actually, you'd have to deliberately attempt to get to those levels. I've never seen it happen with or with typical supplementation. So keep in mind, when we look at obesity and we say that those people are insufficient or even deficient, we're looking at numbers that already are considered way too low. So if somebody comes back at 40, then those levels are already lower than what I would like to see my patients in, but that's considered normal. It wouldn't even fall into insufficiency. So when we look at this particular study, we looked at what they did is they compared 71 obese patients to 59 non-obese patients and looked at their vitamin D levels and how it had a factor on some of their exposures. What was interesting is that almost everybody in the study was insufficient, meaning almost nobody had enough vitamin D levels in their bloodstream. Those levels were higher, so 73% of the obese population had vitamin D levels that were too low. 41% of the non-obese had levels that were too low. And keep in mind that low is a benchmark that is lower than what I generally like to see. So that probably means that almost everybody in the study was lower than what they should be. The only thing that seemed to make a factor or play a role in levels of vitamin D was sunlight exposure, and that totally makes sense. Vitamin D is the sunshine vitamin, and these days we slap on SPF 80 just to walk to the car, or we hide out in our homes. We don't get fresh air and sunlight. Absolute worst combination for healthy immune function. And keep in mind that vitamin D plays a critical role in a lot of different things in the human body. Some things are more hype, some things are reality. Balancing our immune response and making sure the immune system attacks whatever it's supposed to efficiently is one of the hallmarks of vitamin D. Certainly it plays a role in bone health, plays a role in things like preventing certain types of cancers, usually the solid cancers like colon, prostate, breast, and pancreatic cancer. But immune system at this day and age is probably one of the most important factors. And I found that most people are getting closer to taking what they should be. Most of my patients that come in new patients that come in are actually taking vitamin D. Some of them are taking enough, some of them are not taking enough. I personally take 6,000 IUs a day, and I get what I call rational sun exposure. So I rarely use sunscreen unless I'm going to be out in the sun for more than an hour. And so that combination gives me what I feel would be solid vitamin D levels. One thing to say is probably about 15 years ago, the researchers were saying we really shouldn't check vitamin D anymore. It's everybody's deficient. It's inexpensive to supplement. You can supplement for years for what it costs to check blood levels of vitamin D just once. And the safety margins are so high as to be not a concern. So I usually say that if your doctor is checking your vitamin D levels, they are probably at least 15 years behind the medical research. Personally, I can't say I've ran a vitamin D level in probably at least 10 to 15 years. I feel confident with supplementing without backing it up, with the exception of certain autoimmune disorders. Sarcoidosis is probably top of the list, and if you've never heard of that, then you don't need to worry about it. If you have sarcoidosis, you probably already know that you need to have your vitamin D levels checked. So that being said, make sure that you are supplementing with vitamin D or getting a decent amount of sun exposure. Keep in mind our ancestors got boatloads of sun exposure. There was no sunscreen. There was no hiding out in your house all day on the internet. We were designed for high levels of sunlight exposure. As always, I will post a link to this particular study in the comments section. Make sure you like this video, share it with somebody who you think needs the information, and subscribe to the channel.